Greetings. Greetings. Today we're going to talk about Flight 901. That is the one that did the kibosh on any touristy flying over anything Antarctica related. And there are suspicious things about it. And I'll present a couple theories that I have about what happened because it's unsolved. So just have a listen and look for my comments, and I'll wrap it up towards the end to let you know what I really think. But first, this.
November 28, 1979. Air New Zealand Flight 901 has just taken off from Auckland Airport. The DC-10 gracefully spreads its giant wings out over the South Pacific. For the third year in a row, Air New Zealand is offering popular sightseeing flights to one of the most remote and fascinating places on the planet, Antarctica.
Air New Zealand promoted it to be a special event, to go see the bottom of the world. They were selling an experience.
But just minutes from their final destination, a terrifying explosion shatters the silence.
They were selling an experience.
It's so loud, it seems one of Antarctica's largest volcanoes is coming to life. It's summer in New Zealand, and Captain Jim Collins is very proud to have drawn one very plum assignment.
It was a privilege to get those flights, and he was thrilled to be getting the last one, which was the 28th of November.
This is Captain Collins and First Officer Greg Cassin's first flight to Antarctica. So, 19 days before takeoff, they're briefed on coordinates that take passengers out over scenic McMurdo Sound.
They were careful to devise a complex but easily flown route. They were careful to devise a complex but easily flown route that gave the passengers the maximum view.
New Plymouth house builder Frank Christmas, seen here on board the festive sold-out flight, is one of 237 passengers. He's been looking forward to it for a year.
There was lobster and there was champagne and caviar, and so they would have all had a wonderful time. And he was just wanting to see what Antarctica was like.
On a typical flight, passengers get a once-in-a-lifetime view of natural wonders like stunning 12,450-foot Mount Erebus, an active volcano named after Greek mythology's gateway to the underworld.
The gateway to the underworld, Mount Erebus. Yeah. So they always associate Antarctica with terror. And if you go to Antarctica, you would be an international terrorist because you're not authorized to go there. And then the stories we get from the people who are authorized to go there speak of it as a dangerous, horrible place. But then it's so beautiful, but there's nothing about it that strikes me as beautiful. You know, it's like it's a wasteland. It's frozen and it's devoid of life. There aren't even trees. It's so cold. Or gets so little light, actually. I don't know.
Their personal tour guide,
the aircraft is lowering its altitude now.
None other than legendary Antarctic explorer Peter Mulgrew, seen here on an earlier flight.
Well, everybody up here on the flight deck is saying this is just like a great new world, and I'm sure it is for all of you back there.
Because Air New Zealand's DC-10s never actually touched down in Antarctica during the 8-hour flight, pressure is on the pilots to only descend as low as safely possible.
He was trying to show his passengers something for what they'd paid for. After all, this was a visual sightseeing flight.
There is an expectation that when you get on that airplane, I expect that we're going to fly down there, I'm going to get to see the penguins, and I'm going to get to see the terrain, and I'm going to really get to be a tourist and sightsee.
But Antarctica is as dangerous as it is beautiful. Deputy Police Officer Ted Robinson is stationed at Scott Base at the foot of Mount Erebus.
I had to keep a radio log of all the field parties that were out and what they were doing, just for safety's sakes.
40 minutes from their frozen destination, passengers on Flight 901 are standing at the windows, eager for their first glimpse of the endless expanse of ice. Captain Collins radios Robinson to find out about local weather conditions on Ross Island and learns there's a huge problem.
That particular day, the mountain was completely whited out.
Robinson cautions Captain Collins about low cloud cover that descends to 2,000 feet.
I was very keen to let him know that he shouldn't come anywhere near Ross Island.
Robinson recommends making a short detour west over the mainland where the weather is much better. That's where mountaineer Keith Woodford is stationed for the day.
I was actually over in the dry valleys about 150 kilometres away. We're in brilliantly fine weather.
But Captain Collins ignores Robinson's advice, and just after noon, he begins his descent. McMurdo Air Traffic Control confirms a low overcast and reports of light snow. But below the clouds, visibility is about 40 miles. Collins announces to passengers he's hopeful he can descend low enough to give them a good view of Ross Island. He spots a hole in the cloud cover and is cleared by air traffic control for a visual descent.
I was very keen to let him know that he shouldn't come anywhere near Ross Island.
But the four-man crew is having trouble spotting landmarks through the clouds as Peter Mulgrew walks up to the cockpit.
Peter Mulgrew was asked, why aren't you commentating? To which his reply was, well, it's pretty hard to say much when you can't see anything.
Captain Collins radios Robinson to find out about local weather conditions on Ross Island and learns there's a huge problem.
That particular day, the mountain was completely whited out.
Robinson cautions Captain Collins about low cloud cover that descends to 2,000 feet. Still sure of his safe position over McMurdo Sound, Captain Collins continues his descent. Then, at 1,500 feet, the captain's confidence is shattered. Collins tells his crew that conditions, quote, don't look good at all, and that he'll have to climb out of it. Ominously, a minute later, all transmission from Flight 901 stops.
Then I started calling the field parties that were still on a listening watch to see if they'd heard anything of the aircraft. It was negative. No one had heard anything.
It's late afternoon when the missing jet makes international headlines.
The plane would have been able to climb out of it. So close.
But why was the plane flying so close to the volcano? Investigators discover that on the morning of November 28th, Air New Zealand Flight Ops changed 901's final flight coordinate. Instead of flying their usual route down the middle of McMurdo Sound,
There is an expectation that when you get on that airplane, I expect that we're going to fly down there. I'm going to get to see the penguins, and I'm going to get to see the terrain, and I'm going to really get to be a tourist and sightsee.
instead of flying their usual route down the middle of McMurdo Sound, the jet's route was shifted 26 miles to the east over Lewis Sound and directly into Mount Erebus. The jet's route was shifted 26 miles to the east over Lewis Sound and directly into Mount Erebus.
I was very keen to let him know that he shouldn't come anywhere near Ross Island.
Clearly, the pilots couldn't see the mountain or they'd have flown around it.
He spots a hole in the cloud cover and is cleared by air traffic control for a visual descent. In June 1980, the Office of Air Accidents releases its findings, known as the Chippendale Report. It cites pilot error for flying at low level in an area of poor visibility when the crew was uncertain of their position. But in April 1981, a parliamentary investigation known as the Mann Report absolves pilots from any blame. Instead, Justice Peter Mann faults incompetent airline procedures, which change flight coordinates without warning. In a subsequent appeal by Air New Zealand, the New Zealand Court of Appeals faults Mann for overstepping his authority, but does not overturn his findings. The people of New Zealand have never gotten a clear answer to questions about exactly who is to blame for Flight 901.
Everybody's got opinions, but a lot of the evidence just has never been considered.
But one thing both reports agree on, weather was a key factor.
The record shows that they had thought they could get into clear air below the cloud at about 2,000 feet.
It's not what they're making it out to be. So, the mountain itself is what, 10, 15,000, was it 14,000 feet tall? So he's got visibility below 2,000 feet. Why? How does it make sense that he's going to go down 2,000 feet to come out of the clouds, or go through a hole in the clouds to go down to 2,000 feet just beneath the cloud layer to see a mountain that's 14,000 feet high? I mean, it's in the cloud. And how thick is the cloud layer? I mean, couldn't you see the mountain through the top of the clouds? How can you have a cloud layer how thick do cloud layers get? This whole story is just not making sense. But I don't want to conclude prematurely, so let's just move on.
A weather condition called sector whiteout made the flanks of Mount Erebus seem to disappear. The optical illusion caused the approach to Lewis Sound, flown by Flight 901, to look identical to the approach they believed they were flying over McMurdo Sound.
They were seeing what they expected to see, a cloud base above them, a bay or whatever in the front, mountains to either side of them, exactly what they expected to see.
These whiteout conditions are very, very, very real. To be able to tell what's ice and what's overcast skies, the color's the same. You cannot really differentiate it.
Ted Robinson has never been able to make peace with the fact that the crew didn't heed his advice to detour over the mainland where the weather was clear, and that he never had his say in front of Office of Air Accidents investigators.
I maintain that I should have been called to that inquiry.
Maria Collins says she has never asked for sympathy.
I miss him. Still.
But feels her husband's reputation has been unfairly tarnished.
Why would he ever, in that situation, jeopardize anybody's life, let alone your own?
Did you attend the inquiry most days? Yeah.
As much as I could. There were sometimes I couldn't go.
Yeah.
I had to go because it was the only time in history that I would hear it being spoken.
And when in the inquiry did you start to think, I don't feel that I'm necessarily, that when did you start to lose faith in how things were being presented from New Zealand?
Well, of course I was fairly concerned right from the start that it would just be pilot error, and pilot error. And then quite early on, when the judge started questioning some of the evidence that he'd heard, and of course my legal counsel, headed by Paul Davison, was very reassuring, and he just said, be patient, give it time. We haven't finished yet. And I haven't started my cross-examination yet. But you pick up when somebody's not just jollying you along because he's being paid to do that, but because he sincerely believes it. I began to hope that things would not be accepted as pilot error, and that there were many, many, many issues that would have to come up, or to be dug out if not to come up. And many were, and many weren't.
So she speaks cryptically, and I think that I know what it is about, and it's about the things that are part of it that prove that Earth is not a globe. And especially as you go in further into the southern latitudes, the longitudes are skewed because of the stretching. It just, when you get to 77 degrees latitude south, that it's to such an extreme, it creates some real problems. And they wouldn't just crash into the mountain like this. That's kind of ridiculous. And it certainly wouldn't happen again. So why are they not doing these flights? Well, because the whole plan, the whole thing was about sacrificing this flight, whatever it is, however they do it, or wherever the people ended up, or if it even really crashed, I don't even know. But it seems like something happened, that people went away or whatever. And, we have to see.
But enough were for the judge to start to get an idea of what was going on. And no judge would flippantly come to a conclusion of an orchestrated litany of lies, which we all remember. Why would he? Well, I wasn't surprised, because you see, if the pilots were exonerated, which they were, by the judge, then how did the accident happen?
Who is to blame? Well, I'm not saying it was intentional, but it is intentional in a way because of the lie about the shape, the breadth, the form of the Earth, and the big cover-up with that. Yeah, I think the accident happened because of the lie about the shape of the Earth, and it could have been intentional to some extent, but I think it just happened perchance with the deviation of the longitude. But there are many things about this that don't make sense.
And during the inquiry, of course, the navigational errors came up. And if the coordinates in a computerized navigational system are put in and they are checked by a person who has attended the briefing, which Jim had attended 3 weeks earlier, and they all were correct. But now the flight track has been changed and they're flying on a direct path with Erebus. If you're depending on your computerized navigational system, and it's not what you were told it was, it's let you down, hasn't it? Unless you're lucky enough to have an absolutely clear day and you're able to say, but you see with the whiteout, and it was sectional whiteout because the photos taken from the passengers, as you've probably read, were all taken in clear air, very close to the time of impact. They were in clear air, and still their eyes deceived them. Now, nobody knew about that particular phenomenon, and Jim still believed he was flying along McMurdo Sound. He got permission from McMurdo to go down lower. It was a navigational change without informing the captain, which therefore indicated that they could, not knowing that there'd been a change, that they couldn't rely upon that computerized navigation system. The first few coordinates were fine, but as they went further south, the last one was incorrect. They couldn't rely upon that computerized navigation system. The first few coordinates were fine, but as they went further south, the last one was incorrect. So the aircraft is still programmed to go to the incorrect one, and you're expecting to go in an area where it's totally safe and where you've been told you can go further down by the people at McMurdo.
Air traffic control confirms a low overcast and reports of light snow. But below the clouds, visibility is about 40 miles. Collins announces to passengers he's hopeful he can descend low enough to give them a good view of Ross Island. He spots a hole in the cloud cover and is cleared by air traffic control for a visual descent.
That must have, when you sort of found out about that, that must have stirred up a lot of anger.
Well, it did. Well, anger and fury that still there was this attitude that it must be pilot error. And Chippendale, until the day he died, did not retract any of his report.
Because it's still official report, isn't it?
That's still the official report, and the official report for the International Civil Aviation Organisation, ICAO they talk about. And when I went to Parliament in 1999 to table the Mahon report, my understanding was that that would then supersede the Chippendale report because it was tabled in Parliament as an official report. But it didn't. And that was, I found out only later, they were still talking about the validity of the Chippendale report. And that was a big disappointment that it really didn't have the desired effect. Now, many New Zealanders, of course, have their own opinions about what happened, and they feel that the airline, in not being upfront with the errors they made until they were dug out by cross-examination and so on, immediately have taken my side, as it were, or the crew's side. I'm not saying it's just my side. And then there are others who maybe former pilots or possibly former Air Force people who think that if you're driving the thing, you must be at fault, so it's pilot error.
Have you felt a sense, though, of the need to defend Jim's name, your husband?
Absolutely. And if I go to my grave having defended his integrity and the acceptance that his integrity remains intact, then we're there. It's not, he's still just as dead, but his integrity and therefore the memory of the pilot of that plane being a responsible person will be the endearing memory of him, and I think that's important for us.
Well, I'll give you my 2 cents. I don't think that it's your husband's fault at all. It's not pilot error. It's the fact that the map of the Earth as a globe is incorrect, and the deviations show up more as you go south. And I think it was something that turned out to be an opportunity for them to further hide and cover up what goes on in Antarctica. And I don't mean what goes on like there's something brewing down there. I would highly suspect that there would be. It's so off limits, but that's another topic. I'm only saying today that it's the map that's the cover-up. It's not correct. And I think that there are other things that could have factored in, possibly even the computer flight of the plane. I do know that manual control isn't always possible, and that they can just take over planes. They could do it before 9/11. So they may have been able to do it back then, so they just programmed the plane to do this flight, and there's nothing the pilot could do at the time to deviate it, perhaps. But there are different ways that that's already, I think, happened. So you can't rule that out. So it seems to be helpful to their cause either way. Though if they were involved in making the crash happen, then that makes them extremely wrong and to be dealt with. But I think it's probably an accident. But the accident wouldn't have happened if they told the truth about the shape of the Earth and the skewing and deviations and things like that of the longitudes and the relative distances between locations in the extreme southern latitudes. So hopefully this helps to exonerate, and we know a lot more now about the authorities and the whole story and all that stuff. How we never really get the whole story, and even they themselves are completely compartmentalized. They don't know, but somebody does. Somebody is the brains of the operation, running all the compartmentalization. Perhaps. I mean, I guess it's theoretically possible that it's just out of control and it's all compartmentalized, and there are bunches of them not knowing what they're doing. So, all right. So hopefully it was informative, and I think a little bit of critical thought goes a long way with this, like the contradictions. It's rife with contradictions, and it was finished without a fair resolution. It's a bogus, bullcrap resolution or explanation of what happened, and the pilot error is the official thing. That's really, really bad. That would only happen if they wanted it to be that way, perhaps from the beginning. So maybe this one is as sinister as all that. I would hope not, but I can't say conclusively that I could rule that out. I certainly couldn't. So unfortunately, yeah, it's all the same kind of thing. They don't want you to go to Antarctica and find out that it's a huge ring around the plane that you live on in this realm, whatever it is that we call Earth, an enclosed system. So they don't want you going to the wall, to the edge of the bubble or cage or whatever you want to call it, terrarium. So, okay. So it does make you wonder. There's a lot of stuff with, Australia, New Zealand dealing with Antarctica, and that requires further investigation and lots of critical thought. So on that note, have a good one. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.